It took me 78 years to realize that my family love had a price, and that price was my silence and my money. My name is Arthur, and if you are over 60, you need to hear what I discovered before it is too late for your dignity. I am 78 years old, and I spent my entire career as a civil engineer. I was trained to calculate the strength of structures and to see the stress points before a collapse, but I was blind to the rot in my own life. I believed that if I was the silent provider and the grandfather who was always available, I would earn a seat at the table of respect. I thought that by giving everything, I would finally be seen as a man. I was wrong. I was not a patriarch. I was just a financial convenience. 6 months ago, I was at a Sunday barbecue at the house of my younger daughter, Claire. She is 42 years old. The air was thick with the smell of charcoal and expensive meat. I was standing in her kitchen cleaning a plate when I heard her voice through the screen door. She was talking to her husband about a new car they wanted. Claire said they needed to convince the old man to cover the down payment because I do not spend money on anything anyway, and the cash is just sitting there. I looked at the soap bubbles on my wrinkled hands and felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the water. I realized then that I was not invited for the company. I was invited for the extraction. I was an inheritance they were tired of waiting for, and my presence was just a tax they had to pay. I do not know if you are listening to me right now in the silence of your living room, or if you are hiding in the bedroom so as not to bother anyone. Please tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and if you have also felt that you are only loved when you are useful. I need to know I am not alone on this journey. I had to learn the hard way that blood does not always mean loyalty, and what I discovered next changed the way I look at my children forever. For 40 years, I was the man who kept the lights on and the roof from leaking. As an engineer, I knew that a building survives because of its foundation, and I decided to be that foundation for my family. I believed in a silent contract that no one ever signed, but I followed to the letter. I thought that if I provided the safety, the money, the stability, and the silence, I would be rewarded with a seat of honor when my hair turned white. I lived on autopilot for decades, convinced that my value was measured by how much I could endure without complaining. When my wife passed away 4 years ago, the silence in that big house became a physical weight, and I made the mistake that many of you are making right now. I traded my dignity for the crumbs of their time. I became the man who paid the overdue electric bills for Richard because he was having a hard month again. I was the one who canceled my fishing trip to Sitka because Claire needed someone to watch the kids while she went to a spa weekend. I told myself it was love. I told myself I was being a good father, but I was just training them to see me as a utility. I looked at my friend Stanley, who lived across the street for 30 years. Stanley was a good man who gave his house and his savings to his sons while he was still healthy, thinking they would care for him. He died last winter in a state facility that smelled of bleach and neglected skin because his children said they did not have room for him in their new lives. I saw the rot in Stanley's life, but I thought my children were different. I thought my structure was solid. I spent my days waiting for a phone call that only came when a sink was clogged or a bank account was empty. I was a ghost in my own legacy, walking through a house that no longer felt like mine, because I had given the keys to people who did not value the door. I was a man who forgot that a foundation that lets everyone walk all over it eventually turns into dirt. I was existing, not living, and I was too afraid of the loneliness to see that I was already alone. The problem is that when you make yourself a floor, people will naturally start to wipe their feet on you. The sun was beating down on the back of my neck, and the air was thick with the heavy scent of charcoal smoke and expensive cuts of meat. It was a typical Sunday at Claire's house. She is my youngest daughter, 42 years old, and I always thought we had a special bond. I had just finished my meal and slipped away into her kitchen to wash the dishes. I did not want to be a guest who just sat there. I wanted to be helpful, to show I still had a place. I was standing at the sink, watching the white soap bubbles slide over my wrinkled knuckles. The water was lukewarm, and the lemon scent of the detergent was sharp in my nose. Through the thin mesh of the screen door, I heard Claire's voice. It was low, but it carried a coldness I had never heard before. She was talking to her husband, Mark, about a new luxury SUV they wanted to buy. I heard my own daughter say that they needed to sit me down and convince me to cover the down payment. She told him that I do not spend money on anything anyway, and that my savings were just sitting there doing nothing. She called it an early inheritance. Mark chuckled and said that I would probably be glad to feel useful for once, instead of just taking up space at the Sunday table. I froze with my hands still deep in the greasy water. I looked at my reflection in the window and saw an old man I barely recognized. My own child was treating my life's work like a carcass she could pick clean before I was even cold. I was not a father to them in that moment. I was a financial opportunity. I felt a chill move up my spine that had nothing to do with the weather. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. Every holiday, every phone call, every visit was just a part of a long game to get to my bank account. I dried my hands on a towel and walked out to the patio, and for the first time in 78 years, I saw my family for what they really were. I realized right then that if I did not act now, I would spend the rest of my days being bled dry by the people I loved most. I looked at Claire as she handed me a glass of iced tea with a fake smile, and I knew the man who always said yes was dead. I was about to give them an answer they were not prepared for, and it started with a single word they never expected to hear from me. I went home that night and did the one thing I knew how to do. I tried to fix the leak with more of the same water. I thought if I gave Claire $5,000 for no reason, she would see it as a peace offering and finally look me in the eyes. I was trying to buy the respect I should have earned by just being alive. I spent the following weeks being even more available. I was the one who sat in Richard's cold living room for 4 hours waiting for a delivery man because Richard said his career was in a critical phase and he could not afford to miss a meeting. I sat there on his expensive leather sofa, feeling like a piece of old furniture that had been moved out of the way. I believed that my usefulness was my only currency. I thought that if I made their lives easier, they would eventually make room for mine. But the more I gave, the more they took without a word of gratitude. When I mentioned to Claire that I was feeling a bit tired, she did not ask if I was okay. She asked if I could still pick up the kids on Thursday because she had a hair appointment she could not cancel. I was a man trying to build a skyscraper on quicksand. I realized I was not keeping the family together. I was just funding my own disappearance. I looked at the keys to their houses sitting on my nightstand and realized they were not symbols of trust. They were shackles. I was a prisoner who was paying for his own cell and providing the guards meals. I started to wonder what would happen if the bank went dry and the favors stopped. I was about to find out exactly how much my presence was worth when the money was no longer on the table. I do not know if you are listening to me right now in the silence of your living room, or if you are hiding in the bedroom so as not to bother anyone. Please tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and if you have also felt that you are only loved when you are useful. I need to know I am not alone on this journey. Hearing your words is the only thing that makes the silence of this apartment feel less like a prison and more like a shared truth between us. I drove home that night in a silence so heavy I could feel it in my chest. The streetlights blurred into long streaks of yellow, and I realized that my entire life had been a series of structural errors. As an engineer, I knew that if you build on a foundation of lies, the whole thing will eventually come down on your head. My lie was believing that my children loved me for who I was when they actually loved me for what I could provide. I sat in my dark living room for hours, looking at the photos on the mantle and seeing them for the first time as evidence of a crime. I had spent 40 years erasing myself to make room for their lives, and now there was nothing left of me but a checking account and a set of car keys they wanted to take. I thought about Stanley dying in that room that smelled of industrial floor wax, and I felt a scream rising in my throat. I was headed exactly where Stanley went because I was too afraid to be a person instead of a servant. The epiphany was brutal, and it stripped the skin off my soul. My children were not cruel monsters. They were just people I had trained to treat me like a tool. I was the one who taught them that my time had no value and my money was theirs by right. I realized that the only way to save my dignity was to burn the old contract and start over, even if it meant being alone. I was done being the man who paid for the privilege of being ignored. I looked at the house I had worked 50 years to pay for, and I saw it as a gilded cage I was keeping for people who were already measuring the walls for their own furniture. I decided that night that I would rather be a stranger in a small apartment than a ghost in a mansion. I was going to stop being a bank and start being a man again. And the first thing I had to do was take back the one thing that gave them power over me. I reached into my pocket and felt the cold, heavy metal of the house keys, and I knew that by Monday morning, those locks would be changed, and my life would finally belong to me again. I sat in that small apartment and realized that if I wanted to survive, I had to draw lines in the dirt with a stick and never let them cross again. The first thing you must understand is that your money is not an early inheritance, it is your oxygen. I spent years paying Richard's bills and covering Claire's debts, thinking I was being a hero, but I was just suffocating myself. Stop being the bank. If they only call you when the balance is low, they are not calling a father, they are calling a machine. Your hard-earned savings are what keep you from the state home that smelled like bleach, where Stanley died. Hold on to it with both hands and do not apologize for it. Then you have to stop being the on-call employee. I used to cancel my own plans the moment Claire called with a crisis that was usually just her wanting a night out. I thought being a good grandfather meant being a servant. It does not. Grandparenting is a gift you give when you choose to. It is not a work shift you are forced to clock into. Learn to say no without an explanation. Your time is the only thing you have left that is truly yours. Do not let them steal it to fix their own lack of planning. And for the love of your own soul, stop asking for permission to live. I used to look at Claire's face to see if she approved of how I spent my weekends or who I went to dinner with. I was a grown man acting like a child in my own life. Your mistakes are now on your own tab, and so are your joys. If you want to sell the house and travel, or find someone to share your bed with, do it. You do not owe them a version of yourself that makes them feel comfortable. You must take back the keys to your sanctuary. My children used to walk into my house without knocking, like they already owned the walls. It made me feel like a guest in my own history. Change the locks. Your home should be the one place on earth where you do not have to be a provider or a protector. It is your fortress, and if they want to enter, they should ring the bell like anyone else who respects you. Finally, you have to break the silence. I spent decades swallowing my words to keep a peace that was nothing but a lie. I smiled while they ignored me, and I nodded while they insulted my intelligence. The truth hurts them, but the lie is what is killing you from the inside out. If they hurt you, say it. If they are selfish, call it by its name. I would rather have an honest war than a fake peace, because at least in a war, I know where I stand. You are not a piece of old furniture waiting to be moved to the curb. You are a human being, and it is time you started acting like one before the clock runs out for good. I look at my hands and see the spots and the veins, and I know that the sand in my hourglass is running low. I do not have another 40 years to wait for them to finally see me as a man instead of a convenience. Stanley waited. He waited until the very last breath in that room that smelled of death and indifference, thinking his children would eventually remember who he was. They never did. They only remembered what he left behind. Do not let that be your story. I am standing in my kitchen tonight, and the silence is not a burden. It is my victory. I took my keys back, and for the first time in my life, I am not waiting for permission to exist. If you are sitting there feeling that heavy lump in your throat because you know you are being used, then you must act before the sun goes down. Take your keys back. Say your first no today, even if your voice shakes and your heart hammers against your ribs like a trapped bird. If they truly love you, they will learn to respect the boundaries you draw in the red clay of your life. And if they only wanted your utility, if they only loved the bank account and the free labor, then let them walk away now. It is better to be a king in a one-room apartment than a servant in a mansion built on your own blood. My time is running out, but I will die a free man with my head held high and my soul intact. What about you? Are you going to wait for next Sunday to be stepped on again? Or are you going to finally stand up and close the door on the people who forgot that you are still alive? The choice is yours, But remember that the clock never stops ticking. And once the silence of the grave arrives, it is too late to say the words that could have saved your dignity. Stop being the floor and start being the architect of your own final chapter, because no one is coming to save you but yourself.